Hello and welcome to the Dungeon Masters Guildhouse. This is a weekly podcast where I, your host Matthew Whitby, sit down with people all across, the tabletop RPG, DM's Guild, all sorts of, if you're designing or creating RPGs, I'm gonna chat to you. And this week, I'm delighted to be joined by Andrew Cawood. Hello.
Hey there.
How are we doing this fine? I guess I'm going to date me this fine Friday. It's Friday. I'm recording this on a Friday.
We're good. Yeah. Out here on the west coast of Canada.
Nice. Yeah. No. So, I mean, So I off to a good start because I can't get the sentence out. But for the people listening, looking at your catalog of products, it's quite a range. What would be the kind of the kind of like high concept pitch that you would like give to people like this is what this is what I do?
Sure. The main thing we want to do is make practical, inspiring products. So I think there's a lot of great ideas for D&D 5th edition, but they're not always practical. So we want to make sure it's something people can use. And we want to make sure it's something that's going to help people's games have some more depth, and make it easier for them to prep, for example, especially the DM. And so the main books that people might know that we've done are the Monster series.
Oh, there we go. Nice to have them on hand.
Yeah. So there's Feyland, there's Underworld, and then our newest one was Monsters of the City.
Oh, that's so beautiful. I like the covers and
Thanks.
like the sort of like the pristine kind of sheen on them.
Yeah, we're really happy. We could make them we could make them cheaper overseas, but we like to do things as close to home as possible. So we actually use a printing house in the US just over the border.
So that's actually kind of the interesting thing off the bat is so with it's Cawood Publishing. So it's
Cawood Publishing.
Cawood, yeah. So is it like when did that start? When did it become like a whole sort of like publishing house?
Well, that was my idea 6 years ago when we started. It was actually I started playing D&D when I moved to Canada as a kid, late 70s. So not long after it had started, definitely before it really exploded onto the scene. And I played until I was in my last few years of high school. Took a huge break. Never thought I'd come back to the game.
Yeah.
Did a whole bunch of other things, and then it was really playing Skyrim about 10 years ago, and also reading a book called Of Dice and Men about the history of D&D.
Nice.
That I wondered to myself, why did I ever stop playing this game? Because at the time I was a teacher, and my classroom was always based around fantasy. And I'd been a storyteller for many, many years. So I figured with the internet, it'd be easier for people to get together. Mm-hmm. I found a group immediately, started DMing these strangers immediately, and it had felt like nothing had happened in 30 years. Because 5e has a lot of the basic core from the original game, but it's much smoother and more efficient. And I just fell in love with it immediately. And I'd played for a little while. My players said, you really should publish this world that I'd created. So I started doing that with Cawood Publishing. And then it's really grown organically from then. It started with, publishing one of the continents from this world on drive-through. Mm-hmm. And then about a month later, DMsGuild opened up. And
so that's the timeline to like pre DMsGuild days.
Yeah. About a month after I put that on, maybe even less than that. That came out, and I thought, there's a lot of interesting tables that I'd gathered for the world that I just published for the setting. I could put those in a book together to really help people prep, DMs prep for their games, make it a lot easier. A list of new monsters, NPCs, creatures, settings with encounter tables. So I did that. So I was one of the first people on the guild, and then the guild was really helpful at the beginning, helping people who were doing a lot of work on there. Originally, they used to help a lot of the bestsellers, and then things have organically grown, and to the point where, you know, we're doing Kickstarters to raise funds for printed books. And once I got that first printed book, I knew, oh, this is where we were going.
Yeah.
But I had no idea when we started.
I must admit, there is that kind of like, I think I've said it a few times before, but the first time you get like your printed words, it's kind of like a different experience. It's like, this is, I don't know, it's tangible. It's that kind of like, so with the kind of DMs, so obviously going on Drive Through first, was it I think it's the Dungeon Master's Handbook, the first DMs Guild side of things?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's what you know, again, I wanted to help DMs plan and prep and make, and even have something they could use during a game to help things move along. And that was the practical part of our goal with the company, and also inspiring to help people add some depth to their game. And the first thing was the Dungeon Master's Handbook that we put out, because we knew once we were on the guild, we could actually use the IP. That's how it started on the guild, and then it kept growing from there.
And I guess kind of is how quickly did kind of, I guess, the team around, you know, kind of because it sounds like it was pretty early on.
You mean how did our team form quickly?
Yeah.
Really, what we did was we're kind of like, you know, music's a big inspiration for me and sort of theme if you look at our books too. And so the way I deal with projects is sort of like going on a different tour each time. So each project that comes up, I basically hire a team for that project. Yeah, and then in-house, you know, it's mostly family helping with things like finances and shipping and stuff, things like that. That's really the family part of the business. But each project, it's hiring an artist, it's hiring layout, and it's hiring. Now we have an extra editor. So for each project, I try to gather a group of people, and I'm always on the lookout for new artists, new designers, new editors.
And so then I guess, so going back to like one of my early points, one about like the kind of range and scope of all these different, like, again, from like DM guides to kind of like monster like compendiums and stuff like that. Is it like, I'm always curious, is it normally is it always kind of stuff that kind of stems from your own games, or have sometimes these kind of projects kind of sparked from like, this is an area that like there isn't enough support for, that we kind of all.
Right. Yeah, that's a good question. At the beginning, it stemmed all from the world that I created for our game. And now I have two groups, one online and one in person. Although during the pandemic, the in-person group here in Vancouver is also online. So at the beginning, that was true, and definitely the groups are used for all the play testing. But it depends on the project. Like Feyland was a realization that there's so few Fey in 5th edition. It's really my first love. If you look at the other books in the Monster series, which are really campaign books, there's Fey in all of them, including the newest book that we're doing right now. So Feyland is my, you know, the Feywild, Feyland fairy stories. Those are my first love. And to me, it's the foundation of fantasy. Yeah. So we saw a huge gap there. So we and once I got the name, once I realized, you know, because I didn't want to copy what had been done before. So I realized that Feyland had never been used in D&D.
Which, I suppose there's every kind of like, it's normally some combination of wild Fey, Feywild.
Feywild, lots of different names, but I don't think, So anyway, once we had the name, we knew what we were going to do with that. It depends. There's lots of different reasons projects come up.
So before we get too far away from it, so one thing I kind of like to ask is so with your like home setting, what is like what's like the like sales pitch of like what's
So it's the World of Myrr, Myrr is it's in some ways it doesn't have a gimmick, because again, I want to have something that's practical, and a lot of those kind of gimmicky settings, they don't last very long, in my opinion. Like even the Ravenloft setting, I think it has its limits. I don't think it can go on and on and on.
I-
Although I know some people like a gothic theme.
I was going to say it's kind of in character for it to be dreadful and never ending. But I think there's a limit to what you can as a player.
Yeah,
Sometimes
it depends.
I want
there are
happy.
tables who just love that. I get that. That's cool. And there are tables who love like a desert setting forever. But for me, some of the settings, have limits. So my real inspiration is the World of Greyhawk that Gygax made early on. So the World of Myrr is a traditional classic fantasy setting. However, the unique parts about it are that one person, one man, one wizard has changed this entire world and affected it forever. And that's what our new monster book, Monsters of the Wilderness, is tied into as well.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah. So what happened basically is that there was a world that, because these continents are quite far apart, and because some of the different species that live on continents, races, aren't necessarily seafarers or interested in dealing with sea monsters, there wasn't a lot of travel. So they sort of grew up in isolation, a lot of these continents, and they've kind of found a natural balance. For example, there's one continent where it's a bunch of city-states, but they've all kind of got their territory, and there's this natural balance. So what's happened is that because of this one wizard, this natural unbalance for the whole world has been thrown off. And what he's done is he's broken through the fabric of time and space, and he's created multiple portals, tears in the reality all over this world, where not only are things coming through and leaving, but energies are coming through and leaving. And that's changed everything permanently. So this state of balance that's existed is now completely thrown off. Certain groups are gaining power, certain groups are losing power. You have classic monsters and creatures like vampires and knights and dragons and giants. But then we also have some unusual things, like we have a continent that's pretty much all halflings.
Nice.
And we haven't really, we're working on that right now, so I don't want to give too much of it away. And then we do have like a desert kind of area and a jungle world. We've published there's a volcanic world where the dwarves are battling tieflings who've crossed over from hell.
Oh, nice.
And there is the home of the elves, where it is connected to our Feyland setting. And then the main central continent, which we did in a way because it seemed fairly large, and it's a 300-page book. And then once we showed people the whole world, that continent is actually tiny. That's the tiny central continent, and that is just the beginning to this world. And the rest of it we're working on right now, and I hope to have all 9 continents in a book next year.
Oh, interesting. So it's kind of, rather than go at like a pace of like one continent at a time, you're thinking of trying to bring them all together within kind of.
Yeah, well, we did the first 3, and those are in drive-through. But now I've realized I want to put it all together. And also now that we have a much better layout person, his name is Gordon McAlpin. He's done a lot of work on the Guild and drive-through, and worked with us on our last book and the current book. And once I saw what he could do with the layout, that we can
the possibilities.
That 300-page book just for the continent of Myrr will get dissolved down into probably less than 100 pages. And
I think it's always those bloody wizards. They just don't know how to keep their nose out of it. They're always out there causing like world devastating magic.
That's right. And he has quite a story which we're introducing into the Monsters of the Wilderness. A lot of it has to do with his family. So we talk about how what he's done to the world is release this curse. But really, once you see this book and you meet his family, you'll see that the real curse is his family.
Okay. So then I guess next question there. So you again alongside the kind of setting guides, and again you've done a number of like adventures as well as like monster compendium. Do you find yourself like gravitating towards any kind of like writing any type of content, or is it that you just love it all?
I have to say, actually, my favorite thing to write are adventures. And it just so happens that's the least amount of what we've done so far. So I definitely want to do more of that. We might want to make adventure books like the campaign books, the monster books we've made. But if you do look at those monster guides, really they're campaign guides. And really, if you look through them, there are stories there, multiple stories, multiple adventures just waiting for someone to hook into.
Yeah, because I suppose that's one of the benefits of like a monster manual is the fact that you kind of you give the monster, you give the description of like what the monster is, but then it's like it naturally lends itself to like providing story hooks or like, you know, little adventures, because it's like these creatures hang out, I don't know, like I was about to say next to vampires, you know, and then it's kind of like, okay, well, this is, lends itself.
Yeah, exactly. And the first two books we did for the monster series, we did the A to Z monster book, the traditional. But then the last one, it was actually the artist who I work with a lot, the artist Travis Hansen, who's worked on a lot of our books. He and I, for the last, the Monsters of the City book, we went, let's change this up. And it was mostly Travis's idea to divide the book into city districts.
Okay, yeah.
So then again, we're giving the opportunity to make it easier for DMs to plan their campaign, plan their adventure, or even run encounters on the fly when you get to a certain district in the city. For example, you're in the sewers, and you open the book into the sewers section. Not only are there monsters there, but there are encounter tables. It tells you some information about that area, like who could be in control, what factions are there.
So it's kind of an interesting way to kind of, again, make it, I suppose easier, because again, you're not having to like flip through the entire like A to Z to like, I need the sewer monsters. They're all kind of held together, as well as being able to kind of, again, kind of flex those adventure writing muscles to be like, oh, here's some encounters, which are like mini adventures.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Kind of, so following on that, so from like, was it Monsters of the City, Monsters of the Feyland, and like Monsters of the Underworld?
That's right, yeah.
Is there, which would you say is like, was the most difficult to come up with monsters for?
To be honest, none of them. To be honest, I had about 20 extra monsters for those first two books.
Wow, okay.
And the newest, and then the city book, another at least 10 or 15 extra. So much that, you know, we will consider going back to one of those settings. And I have taken monsters that didn't fit in there and put them into other things. So that wasn't a problem. With a new book that's it's just over 160 pages. So it's come a lot from Feyland, which is about 102, I believe.
Jeez.
Yeah, so now we're getting to the point where how big, you know, we don't want it to be too big.
No, but I suppose, again, there's you never really want, like, you always want more monsters, you know. I suppose it's kind of,
well, you know, however, we have to pay for that.
I'm still in like a sort of like PDF mindset. I imagine when you're paying like per page per print, it's
right.
Probably,
yeah, no, we have to consider, you know, there's a limit to how far we can go. So the new book, Monsters of the Wilderness, right now it has 122 monsters. It's just over 160 pages.
Wow.
So that's probably about as big as we want to get for these books, because we have an idea for at least 2 or 3 more of these.
So it sounds like then, so across the label, you've easily done like, what is it, about like 100, like 300 or so monsters, probably excess at this point.
Over 300 for sure. Yeah.
What would you say is your like process for creating monsters then? Like is there, like, do you go in necessarily with like a core mechanical idea, like from the get-go, or like, yeah,
that's a good question. So it ranges. Sometimes it is a mechanical thing where you've seen the template of a stat block in a monster book from the past, whether it's 5th edition or as I said before, I'm really from 1st edition from AD&D. So I might look at mechanics and go, oh, that's interesting. I would like to do something with that. Either change on what's being done. For example, we took the roper and we because the Roper used to be quite nasty, and the one in 5th edition is pretty tough, but we made a way tougher version of that. So it can be a mechanical thing, or sometimes it can just be a name.
Yeah. Is it some occasionally a pun? Is that
occasionally? Yes, I find there, as we go along, there's more and more humor in the books, and most people seem to enjoy that. I know it doesn't always work. That's fine.
No.
We're not trying to please every single person. Our goal actually is trying to give a variety of monsters for a variety of tables, because I know there's tables out there that play horror games. There's tables that play like just role playing for the most part.
Yeah.
There's tables like ours that are more traditional that play lots of combat. So we try to provide a variety, and we have really low level monsters, and then we've had CR 30 level monsters. Yeah, so we try to give a variety, and it can be just a name. It can be like the Doubt Trout from our Monsters of Feyland.
That's a good name.
That was purely a name where I was like, oh, I love that name. I want to do something with that. I don't know what it's going to be, but that's a good place to start.
So then I guess kind of following on from that then is so once you're toiling away, you've kind of worked through like a particular stat block. How do you kind of balance that? I guess there is that idea of like, I guess, mechanical bloat. It's the idea of like, sometimes in your mind, you're like, oh, it'd be cool if they can do this. They could do, suddenly they have an ability where they get 4 new arms, and each of those arms could do like, do you have any kind of like things to brace about? Okay, this is getting on beyond like a bit much.
For sure. I know. I'm with you 100%. So usually it's that less is best. Usually I want to, because, and we even did that at the beginning with having one monster on one page to keep it simple and clear. We've changed that a little bit because we've ended up with some really big monsters or some more complex monsters. Yeah. So in general, it's that less is best. And in editing, sometimes I'm pulling things out. I'm taking a feature out. I'm taking, even sometimes the creature might have 2 weapons. I pull a weapon out. Sometimes I'll take spells off a spell list.
Yeah. I always feel like you kind of like, at the very least, like the spell casting part of stat blocks is always a little bit clunky. And I do kind of like, I've seen people kind of lean towards where actually within the actions, they just have the spells like listed rather than necessarily, which, I think it can make sense, because sometimes it is that case of like, as a DM, I try as I might, I don't know all the spells. Right. I know Magic Missile, I know Fireball. Those ones I can get by almost every time without fail. But some of the more niche ones, it's a case of like, okay, I need to quickly, like mid initiative, I need to kind of look it up and bust out my cones.
Yeah, it's a good point. I think, and the other thing is you want to honor the monster. You want to honor what you've created. So simple is good and clear is definitely what you want to do, but also you want to make sure the monster's realistic. So for example, in the Feyland, you're going to have a lot of magic. And so we have a lot of creatures in there that can cast spells, and we have a lot of creatures that are resistant to magic. So sometimes the mechanics, you don't have a choice but to be realistic. It's going to be a more complex stat block. For example, we made a Vampire Lord, which is a very powerful vampire, and the vampire stat block is already enormous. So it had to actually be a page for the stat block and a page for the monster's image for the illustration. So sometimes it will get big. And then the new book, there's a lot of very big creatures that can do more things because, for example, they might have claws and they can bite and they can use a tail and they can fly. Yeah. And they might be able to spit something or breathe something.
There definitely is like a correlation between like the monster CR and how large their stat block is. I would
in general. In general. So you want to be, and there is one in the new book where I was like, wow, maybe, there are a lot of things in there, but it just works because the creature is a very agile fey creature again. Surprise, surprise, that can do a lot of different things. So I decided to keep that keep that one to keep it quite big.
Mm-hmm.
But in general, it's, you know, you want to take out things. The same with the bio. You know, our bios have got a bit longer as we've gone along for the monsters, the write-ups. But I think, like most monster books that I read, I think there's too much fluff in there.
Mm-hmm.
So we definitely wanted to stay away from that. We wanted, like, if we're going to write something about the monster, we wanted to make it, it should mean something,
Mm-hmm.
and it should be useful. Again, my practical goal. We don't want to just have things in there just for flavor text. So I think we've done that fairly well. And people kind of got used to that with Feyland, because especially Feyland, we didn't write a lot for the bios. We kept it quite brief.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I suppose that is something of like a trend within kind of like the monster compendium style of books, is that sometimes, again, the kind of lore or sometimes you don't need a huge amount of lore, because sometimes the stat block is almost self-explanatory.
Exactly.
And I kind of want to add like another point in terms of like balancing, I guess, the length of like a stat block. But I guess a good chunk of it is like, what is this creature's purpose? Like a vampire lord, like you're not going to go into a room and there's not going to be like 13 vampire lords. There's going to be one. So you want that one vampire lord to, like, you know, be a big deal. If it's like, I don't know, like a vampire grunt or a vampire goon.
Yeah.
You want them to be like, you know, they only have like 3 abilities because they're like, you know, they're like level 1, you know.
Exactly.
And I suppose that's like, yeah, a decent kind of, I guess, like not a heuristic to be like, okay, maybe this guy needs more abilities because, you know, they're like a big deal.
Yeah.
Although now I have the idea of like, I want to try and do like a CR 30 monster with as little text as possible.
Yeah.
I'm just curious of like what it would be. It probably would just be, they have one ability and it either instantly kills a creature, or something to that effect.
Well, I did do that to a certain degree, because the last book with City, what we had for each of the districts was we had a sin and a virtue. And we actually created legendary monsters to represent each sin and virtue, and then tied those to the district. So the wealthy district, for example, which is like nobles and kind of like the nouveau riche, but not the royalty.
Yeah.
The nobles, it was all about greed or humility. Or sorry, greed or humility. I think that's right. And no, not greed and humility.
Charity?
Pride and humility.
Okay.
So when we made those stat blocks kind of grew a bit, because those are really powerful creatures that can do a lot of different interesting things. And most of them were fiends. What we did this time is we tied a titan into each of the 7 areas of the wilderness. Mm-hmm. So there's a titan in the ocean, there's a titan in the desert. So what I wanted to do is exactly what you said, is for the most part, is I wanted to make stat blocks that weren't as big as we'd made in the one before. But then and they're not CR 30, but they're CR sort of 23 to 25. Pretty nasty.
Big chunky.
Yeah. So what you do is what you said, is you have a claw hit that can do 4d10.
Yeah.
And they're resistant to magic. They have legendary resistance.
Mm-hmm.
They can move quickly. They have AC is 19 or 20. Mm-hmm. So there's ways to do it so that you don't get that bloat.
Yeah. No, it's an interesting challenge. And that's, I guess, what it kind of is like the fun again. So the fun part of sometimes writing adventures is when you have this opportunity to create the stat blocks, because you can really, again, you shape the encounter around like the stat blocks you use, and sometimes it's kind of that balance of like, well, there's not a creature that necessarily exists to kind of suit the situation, and yeah, it's kind of that fun balance of like, because now you have the idea of like how the flow of the encounter, and that like once the players come across one of these titans, they can be like, okay, let's stay 300 feet back. Let's let's give that a go, because when we get within like 20 feet of it, it's a bad time.
Yeah.
No. So then I guess, so to pull back from stat blocks then, and to talk more generally about like the process of like starting a new book to getting it printed in America. What would you say is kind of like a typical creative process for you?
Well, at the very beginning, it's writing ideas in kind of a general idea book, notes that you're taking all the time. So right now I'm working on 2 books for the future that probably won't come out until next year.
Mm-hmm.
And then I have some ideas of other things to do, even including non-RPG things as well. So it's taking those. So originally you have those ideas, then you decide, okay, this is the project that we're going to do now. And for example, in the Monster series, we've been doing 1 book of those a year for the last 4 years.
Which I imagine, again, with the case of 100+ stat books, I imagine again in these books you have a good amount of really commissioned art.
Yeah.
So 1 a year seems pretty good pace.
Yeah, that takes up most of the year. However, I've only been working part-time, so coming September, I'm really excited because I'm actually going to get to do this full-time.
Whoa, congratulations.
Yeah. So thanks. So yeah, working part-time, those books take about, I'd say, at least 6 months of coming up with the creatures, working on the stat blocks, starting to work on the bios.
Oh,
and then
sorry, I was gonna ask a question. So is it the case of your processes? Do you come up with all the ideas first, or do you, once you come up with an idea, do you then begin to tinker with the stat block, or do you want to try and get all your ideas out first?
Do you mean? Well, basically, what I do is I have a template for the book, and now we have a template for the Monster series books. So I have a book of around 120 pages, a blank book with about 100 stat blocks to start.
Okay.
And I start first. I have a list of creatures, and that's usually well over 100. As I said, I have some extras right now, and then putting those down, starting to build them, and then deciding at one point which ones are we going to keep. And the extra ones I'll save in case I want to use them later, or we might have room. And then the next stage, we've changed it over years, but now the new process is bringing in a layout. So this is about 6 or 7 months after the original starting of the writing part of the manuscript. Then we bring in layout, and we have it set up now so that I can go right to layout. That person starts working with it, and recently, as I said, it's been Gordon McAlpin. And they set up the whole book layout-wise. And then I have a list of descriptions for all 100, 120 monsters. And then I start working with the artist. And now he has a book that just needs illustrations, and he knows what spaces he's drawing into. Which
I imagine is a lot easier for them to kind of work with.
Exactly. We didn't do that at the beginning. At the beginning, we basically at the end said, here's the spots, and Travis drew into the spots. But we hadn't worked together now. And then the layout and artists will work together to change things. For example, in the Monsters of the City, one of the pages, it just worked that there was only a place really on the bottom or the top in terms of layout for the illustration, and it was horizontal.
Yeah. So
it just happened this creature was in the district, which is connected to sloth. So the artist came up with the idea is I'm going to have this person lying down.
Yeah. It's what is it? Restrictions kind of breed creative solutions.
Yeah. So Lothar the Lethargic, who is an illusionist, works for the Thieves Guild. He is lying down in the on the presentation and the page. So and then before the manuscript goes to layout, of course, there's a lot of editing. Now that's about a month or two. It used to be 2 weeks. Now we do about a month or two, and we have 2 people instead of 1. And then after the artist is finished and the layout is finished, which hopefully, for example, this year, that'll be in about I'd say a month and a half to 2.5 months. It'll take a while.
A quick question a quick question about your editors. Is it the case
Sure.
of like you just have two editors kind of go over the whole document, or do you have got like one kind of angle towards like the stat blocks and one kind of for the words of like the fluff?
Yeah, good question. One of the editors is myself, and I'm really in charge of the stat blocks.
That's fair.
Which is which is way more work than it looks like.
Yeah.
Because everything has to, every number has to be right and checked, and every proficiency bonus, and is
there anything about stat blocks that kind of continually kind of trick you up? Although there are a lot of things
that I learned. Like, for example, the Feyland and Underworld, there are some mechanical mistakes we made. And we do have a errata put up on drive-through. Okay. There's a number of things. Like, for example, when you do damage, I think we even wrote down, 1d8 piercing and 1d4 poison. And it took me a while to realize, actually, it should be plus 1d4 poison. Little things like that, which don't really change the monster, but we want to make sure the book is consistent.
Yeah.
So I'd say, Monsters of the City is a huge step up from the other two because of the amount of editing and because of the layout. So then in the whole process of doing the manuscript editing, then layout, then art, then after all that is done, then again, we go back to editing.
Mm-hmm.
The editing too, as I said, one person's really stat block and bio and their extra text. And then another person is mostly just the bio. So my assistant editor, she mostly just looked after the write-ups of the monsters. And then if she had time, she'd check into the stat blocks.
Yeah.
And it really did help to have an extra person this time. So that's the general process. And then it goes to the printing house. Then they send us a copy, and then we do another editing check, and it goes back to them, and then printing. Then it gets sent up here to Canada, and then we start to distribute it. So it takes about a year from beginning to end.
How has it been kind of like, I guess, because this is so far beyond like my scope in terms of like dealing with like a printing and the distribution side of things. How I guess I don't really know what my question is, but like I guess how is it dealing with like the printing house?
Mm-hmm. Well, the reason we stay with them is because they're amazing. We're really lucky, I'd have to say, actually, most of the people that I've worked with, I've just been really lucky because for me, I just want to make sure the lines of communication are open. So whatever happens, whether it's good or bad, that we can work on it and we can resolve it. And the printing house has been amazing. As I said, we could do it quite a bit cheaper and go overseas. But then there's issues of the quality, and there's issues of it being on a ship. And again, we want to try to help local creators. For us, that's in Canada, and then our neighbors in the US as well. Most of the people I work with are actually in the US. I've had one artist in Singapore that I've worked with, and one layout person who helped us at the very beginning who lives in Toronto.
Nice.
But most people are in the US.
So does this mean somewhere in your house you have a room that is just filled with boxes by any chance?
Well, that's the reason, as I said before we started talking, is that we're moving because I need a proper office, especially if the world closes again.
Yeah.
And we need space for inventory. Right now, shipping time, right now we're in a condo, and the entire condo is filled with hundreds of books, and we're trying to get a better system for sure.
Nice. No, fair. It's good. I don't know. Like it's got to be cool to like look in the room, and obviously like no space to move around, but it's like those are my books. That's
Yeah, it's pretty satisfying. Like just arriving at the warehouse or having the truck arrive here, and you see crates, pallets full of them. Yeah, for sure.
Wow.
It's very satisfying, and also you really feel really good about all those people who backed you, because as I said, our printed books are really because of all the backers on Kickstarter.
Yeah. So,
and we want to make sure we make something really good for those people. So
I guess that's something we haven't even really kind of spoke about is the kind of going through the Kickstarter process multiple times and kind of being successful. I guess the best way to, what is something that you've kind of learned with each campaign that has kind of helped?
Well, the good thing people might like to hear is the first time we weren't successful. So we didn't have a footprint on social media. We'd never published anything before. We'd never written anything before. And we tried to raise a few $1,000s for our setting, the first continent to be printed, for art, and mostly for art at that point. We were doing everything else in-house. And we tried to raise a few $1,000s. We raised less than 1,000 and realized we had a ways to go. But we didn't give up. We turned around and we found a way to raise money ourselves for the art for that book. We published it about a month later on the on drive-through.
Nice.
Doing everything we could in-house. We found an editor who could do layout sort of, and enough for it to be palatable. And then the biggest thing right away we learned is that we've got to network with people. Mm-hmm. We've got to get a better footprint, and we've got to show people what we can do. So right then we had the setting published on drive-through. A month later, we started publishing things on the DMsGuild, and we quickly started to get a following of people who liked the fact we made things that could help their games, especially their prep, a lot better. Because instead of having to search through everything, it was organized for you. Mm-hmm. So that was really the start, and then just keep meeting people, networking with people, finding artists to work with. And at the beginning, we mostly found people who were kind of starting out. Mm-hmm. One of them now is too expensive for us to work with.
I mean, that's always a good sign, though. It's the case of they've gone and they've thrived. Yeah.
So it was not too expensive at the beginning back then, and now he charges. We can't afford him. He would, the monster books would be 4 or 5 times the cost.
But the art, again, it would be it'd be worth the price.
Yeah. So it was it's been a very organic process, and we've just also being part-time, we've had to find time to work, and with the pandemic, moving from the one office we do have in this place to the kitchen table.
Nice.
So Monsters of the City and Monsters of the Wilderness were mostly made at a kitchen table. Not only a kitchen table, but with my daughter running around with me, trying to watch her as well. So the whole process of where we've come so far has been, gradual, and getting a lot of help from people, amazing people who promoted us on social media, and it works both ways. We're inspired by a lot of these small companies. Funnily enough, it's really not a lot of writers; it's a lot of artists for us who have been the inspiration and support. It's miniature painters like Michael Mordor, this painter in Scotland. It's a guy on Instagram, Inked Mage, who makes these amazing setups with his 3D terrain and miniatures on Instagram, just spectacular. So we've had a lot of support, a lot of people going out of their way to help us. That's helped a lot.
But it sounds like a good amount of persistence on your side of things.
Yeah, for sure. I'm the kind of person, when I was a teacher, parents would sometimes say, "Oh, my child is really stubborn." And I would tell them it's not going to be a problem.
Yeah, no, I'm more stubborn. It's a battle of wits.
Yeah, it's not going to be an issue at all because I don't give up. My motto pretty much is I'll find a way. So and we found it right. When our first Kickstarter didn't work, we were like, we'll find a way to do it.
Mm-hmm. And by golly, you did. So I can't really I keep talking about I guess the sheer number of hats that you wear. Again, from writing to distribution, I don't think the hats could get any more kind of different. But across everything that you kind of do, what would you say is your favorite part and your least favorite part of the process?
Well, I've been surprised how much I like all the non-creative work. I knew I would like the creative work, and I do. I love it, and coming up with ideas and the writing, and to improve the writing. Excuse me, and keep improving our product. I knew I would like all those things, but I come from a background of a family who are all business people.
Okay.
But I'm kind of the black sheep because I was the one who went into university for business, and let's just say it was not a successful endeavor.
It was a failed business.
So I ended up going into more creative things in university. But what's happened is that all that business sort of background or that I was surrounded with has sort of reared its head and ended up helping because I've actually enjoyed all of it.
Wow.
And I love marketing. I love project managing, especially, when I have a great team with Gordon and Travis. It's easy. I think if you choose really good people, it's not that we do have differences for sure. And, sometimes they've asked me to change things. Sometimes they've come up with ideas that they're like, I think this is way better. And I've been, actually, that's a way better idea.
Yeah.
Sometimes I'll go away for a few hours and come back and say, that was a really good idea. I should have listened to you the first time. Yeah. So I like all of it. The part that's not being as smooth for me is layout, which is why I have hired people.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm still learning, and that's sort of my next goal is to learn more about that.
Yeah. But
I know, again, there's only so much you can do.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can delegate things, it's usually a good idea to do it. Again, the idea of keeping things simple.
I think what's interesting kind of about layout is that kind of intersection between both a technical and a visual skill. Because there is definitely again, there's the technical side of just making sure that there's not bleed, everything stays within set regions, getting all the heading sorted and hyperlinks and all that fun stuff that everyone has. But then there is the kind of the art side of okay, well, how do you naturally draw people's eyes across the page? How do you kind of keep things consistent and readable?
Right.
Yeah, it's a tough one. I think I personally, my favorite part in terms of anytime I do layout is where you put some text in or you put an image in, and then it moves everything down a page and just ruins everything. Yeah. And they're like, okay, that's fun. Yeah, and okay, that's gonna be I'm gonna fight with this for the next half an hour.
Yeah, so that's the part that I would like to work on and learn a lot more, and have learned a lot, but I've still got a long way to go. Yeah.
So is it the case of maybe dip your toes in layouting an adventure, or a little kind of contained, or are you thinking, I'll just do another 100-page?
No, I think you're right. I think I do have an adventure I'm writing right now for one of the additional rewards as part of the last Kickstarter.
Yeah.
So I'm writing that, and that gives me a chance, just like you said, to practice some ideas for layout. And the visual part, I find I have an eye for that, no problem. Like you said, it's the technical. Mm-hmm. It took me a while just to learn. Oh, there's another layer underneath there's a style layer. What's that? So
yeah. No,
Yeah.
fair. Yeah, no, that's no, it's like it's kind of fun. And then I suppose, if come, in 2-3 months where you're like halfway through the layout, just like, you know what, I'm going to delegate. I've tried. There's no shame into that. I'm just going to hold up.
Yeah. Yeah, you can't do everything. And I think even I got my little daughter actually helped me a little bit with shipping this time.
Really?
Yeah, I had to, of course, double check everything, but she would just carrying things around because, the books, luckily we haven't had a huge amount. Like we're still, because we would actually have to hire people to deal with a larger amount, like in terms of the amount of shipping in and out. The numbers are still reasonable for a few people. But, hopefully we keep growing, and then, I'll have to hire some of my nephews and nieces to help out.
I like the idea of like, right now it's reasonable, but I hope it gets unreasonable. It's that balance.
Exactly. Yeah, it's exactly. You want things to be successful, and then there's consequences if you have 1,000 books in your condo.
So talking like more broadly then, across everything from just like running like a project from start to finish to like being a largest, like I guess a publishing house more generally, is there a lesson that you wish you'd learned maybe sooner?
The biggest thing actually again is a creative lesson, because to me that comes back to the core of what we're doing. And what happened with the Feyland book is I had about 5 or 6 monsters that I thought I should put in. Again, there were extras, but 5 or 6 that I was like, these are kind of out there. These are really pushing it, including the Doubt Trout. and my version of the Goblin King, where I thought it would be hilarious if the Goblin King had seen the labyrinth. And this goblin dressed up as the David Bowie character. Yeah. I just thought that was hilarious. And that a certain group of people would totally understand. And the people who didn't, that's fine.
This is just a quirky Goblin King.
Exactly. He's just a weirdo. So anyway, what I learned was that almost every single one of those monsters were the most popular monsters in that book.
Interesting.
And when I did it again for Underworld, the same thing. And so I learned that if I have, something that I think is a really creative idea, it's really pushing the boundaries, go for it, do it, and make sure it goes in the book. And so I've tried to do that more.
Yeah. No, I mean, I guess it kind of makes sense, because, a lot of these times, I guess people are picking up these books because they want to see something different. They want to see something out there. And there's not many things more evocative than a doubt trout. A doubt trout.
Yeah.
I don't know why. Correct me if I'm wrong, but my visual for a doubt trout is just like a fish with legs. But I feel like that's off. That's just my weird.
I like that visual. There might be a fish with legs in the new book.
Oh,
but the doubt trout is, it's just this kind of, it's a strange looking fish who has sort of a smirk on its face, actually. Originally, the artist drew it kind of as just a fish. And I said, I want something on that face, which turned out to be sort of a smirk. And they radiate doubt. So
nice.
It can affect the party in the wilderness. But then I came up with the idea of what if these evil, big bad evil guys, what if they collected these fish and put them in bowls in their lair? So that's the other version, the indoor version of the doubt trout. So it's I think it was a good a lesson to learn, and I continued with all the books.
Yeah, just and anything and everything goes. I mean, I'm sure there are limits, but I think like it's if it definitely is out there.
There are limits. There are limits. There are monsters who just don't make the cut. There are monsters who even get to the point where there's an illustration, the layout's being done, and then we're like, I don't think so.
Really?
And they get pulled. Yep, they get pulled. So there are some art. I've had probably 1 or 2 illustrations from each book that I'm going to use somewhere else.
It's good because that way, but no, I imagine sometimes it is a case of like, I guess, because it's a whole package. It isn't necessarily just a stat block in isolation. It's, you know, the pairing with the art as well, and, you know, the layout on the page, that if it doesn't convey the right message, then I guess it's better to take it out than, I guess, dilute the whole book. I don't know.
Yeah, well, it can also be the layout of the 2 pages. It can be like, oh, I do not want those 2 monsters together. It's rare, but it has happened.
Is it what in terms of like contrast of like a super serious monster against is
it just, for whatever reason, it just doesn't work at all. Like, for example, I think it was the first monster in the Underworld book, originally because that was still an alphabetical book, was actually an angel monster I'd created. That my idea was this angel who was in the Underdark, who did good down there in this horrible environment.
Nice.
But what happened alphabetically is that was going to be the first monster in the book. And I was like, you can't have an Underworld book, an Underdark book, where the first monster is a good monster and is an angel.
Yeah.
So the funny thing that happened a couple times now, is that I realized I never want to copy, another edition or someone else. So we look through other monster books from other editions, third-party books, and I realized that somebody had used a name of something at the last minute. So I had to rename this monster, but because the book was already laid out, like the original 2 books, the layout was done, it was set.
Yeah, it's a lot harder to just move a page than it.
Well, I now had to name a monster between like the letters ST and like RA, and come up with a name that was now going to fit that monster. So that was a big challenge.
I suppose if it was following like, you know, the monsters of the city side of thing, I suppose you could you could group them in like, oh, these are like heroes of, you know, and that way you can kind of, you know, get around. But that's fair. I suppose it's a crazy, that's a problem you've created yourself. But you know, those are sometimes the fun ones to solve.
Yeah, I think it was I named something the shadowy tree. I think that was it. I think. And another third-party publisher had put a monster book out a couple of years before that. And I found that monster, or that name.
Yeah.
And now I had to rename it. And it took me like a day or 2 to figure out, like, and I finally came up with ruin tree.
Nice. It's tough though, isn't it? Because it's like, this is a shadowy tree. Well,
it's tough when you have to name it between, like I said, SH or ST and RA. It has to fit in there alphabetically.
Well, it sounds like you solved it in the end, and that's all that matters.
Yeah.
Nice. So, wow, damn, fantastic. So then, I guess, to talk more broadly about, like, you know, the kind of community as a whole. Because again, you're talking about, like, you know, some of the kind of from miniature painters to kind of like Instagram models, if that could be like,
RPG Instagram people,
who would you say like are some of like the key, I guess, in your own way, you mentioned it's less of individuals and sometimes more of like publishing houses, but who are like some of these groups within the tabletop community that like particularly inspire you?
Well, as I said, like you said, some of the miniature painters, some of the people who build these amazing setups for their games. Because just looking at those, you get these ideas for stories and creatures.
Yeah.
Most of my inspiration is from nature or everyday life. Actually, some of the monsters are sort of based on archetypes that I've seen in people, for sure.
Nice.
And or combinations of archetypes from people. And then a lot of it is actually from more original art from back when I played D&D, like from Larry Elmore art, Clyde Caldwell, Errol Otis. A lot of those original D&D artists I'm still inspired by, because that's my background for D&D. And a lot of our adventures, we either do World of Myrr adventures, or we go back and we do those original stories.
Mm-hmm.
And then we use the 5e mechanics, which I think are just so smooth to run a game. Yeah.
Wow, no fair. Yeah, I think it's always kind of surprising, like the kind of pools where you can kind of draw inspiration from. It literally is all around you. It's unescapable. No matter where you go, you're gonna be inspired in one way, shape, or another.
Yeah. My little daughter named one of the monsters in the new book, for example.
What did she name it?
Well, I don't want to give again.
Oh, sorry. Yeah,
stuff
spoilers.
Yeah, I'll just say it's another fey creature. And yeah, it's just a funny name that she said, and and right away I went, oh, that's a monster.
So I take it she's getting credited within your next book then.
She is, yeah, she's in the book. Yeah.
Oh, that's adorable.
Yeah.
So Andrew, looking at the time, we've done it. We've well and truly nattered away an hour. But again, I never want to end a podcast without kind of hearing some of the interesting. Again, you've kind of alluded to bits and bobs of some of the stuff you're working on. But yeah, so what are you currently working on? And secondly, where can all the people listening, they're listening, find out more about your work?
Sure. So yeah, as I said, I'm working on the Monsters of the Wilderness book. We're really just working with the art right now. So I'm project managing that. I hope that should be out in the fall. And then the other book I'm working on is, as I said, our World of Myrr book for our setting, where I'm filling in the rest of the continents and writing up all of that lore. So both of those will probably be out next year. Well, the Wilderness book in the fall, and then the Myrr book hopefully to Kickstarter next year.
Yeah. And
then a few other projects here and there. People can find us. We're all over social media, Twitter, Cawood Publishing, Instagram, Facebook, the usual. And then our site is worldofmyrr.com. And yeah, I'm very happy you asked me on here. I've seen a lot of your shows, and it's always interesting.
It's like that. My show is only ever as interesting as my guests. So I thank you for coming on, Andrew. No, it's been a pleasure. It's really, again, that's any kind of chance I get to kind of chat with people who are just, I guess, on I guess like a whole different stage of like tabletop RPG like creation as far. It's befuddling. I've been involved in Kickstarters, never run one myself, but it's daunting. And the fact that you've gone through it as many times and you still have plans to go through it again, I think I'm beyond impressed. I think that's the right word. But otherwise, I've been Matthew Whitby. You can find me at Whitby Writes. I don't know if I have anything coming out. It's that time of the year again where I might have things coming out. I don't know. So if there is, please do check the description. But my final and arguably my most important question, Andrew, how do you end a podcast?
I think by thanking the host for having me on.
Oh, thanks. Yeah.
Yes. Thanks, Matthew.
No, thanks me.